Just say who you are, what your name is, and which state you represent, or what class you're in.
Brittany Waite for the Sunnybrook Independent. And in regards to the Empowerment and Innovation Act, it said that the act will allow for greater participation in public and private partnerships. How much say will the private have on?
Well, I mean, I think that there's a number of things that kind of limit what can be done in those areas. And of course, the major thing is it will be under regulation. And I think we're still working out exactly, by we being SUNY, is still working out exactly how a board would be constituted to look and review these kind of partnerships that would come forward. But the idea would be to really give, I think, the system more flexibility in doing some of the things that we think are very important but are very difficult to do right now under the current SUNY regulations. And a great example, I think, would be graduate student housing, for example. Right now, we've run the numbers about how much it would cost us to build under SUNY graduate student housing, how much we would have to charge rental-wise, and those numbers don't work well. And the idea would be if we could develop a public-private partnership, so a private developer could build on this land graduate student housing, that would be much better. The protections have to do primarily with things related to making sure that, that union workers or appropriate wages would be provided to those people, and that would be important. You know, the intent of this is not to remove us from, you know, some of the important protections that have been done in the past for workers, but rather to give us the flexibility, essentially, to partner with private industry in this area and as well as others. And I think for me, it's really an important part of the Act, because I think, as said before, there are many opportunities that we just are not able to do well now, or at least there's so many barriers to doing them that people don't do them. Some of these things are not impossible to do, but there's so many barriers to do them that that really makes it difficult to do well.
I have a question, but if you could just look at Brittany when you answer.
Yes, of course.
I'm wondering, when Chancellor Zipfer came here the first time for her fifth conversation, in a press conference you had mentioned that with the Empowerment Act that it is likely that tuition is going to be going up, and you had mentioned that surplus tuition would be going into scholarship funds, but do you have any idea how much tuition is going to go up and how frequently it's going to go up?
So one of the interesting things that people don't realize is the fact that tuition has really gone up 7% per year since 1988. So if you actually look at what's happened with SUNY tuition, it's gone up 7% per year since '88. The problem has been it hasn't gone up in any reasonable way. So you've had times when it went up 50% or so at one time, and other times when it didn't go up for 5 or 6 years. So for students and their families, it's really been kind of a tuition roulette issue. I mean, if you happen to be one of those lucky people who happen to be going to a SUNY school when tuition didn't go up, you had a great time. You went 4 years without any change. On the other hand, if you're one of the unlucky people, I think particularly in the early 90s, you could have seen tuition double essentially during your time here. So that's not a practical way to deal with things. I mean, it really doesn't make any sense at all. So one of the things we've tried to do is, can we figure out a way to make it much more rational, where increases would be predictable and would make sense. I think tuition does usually need to go up on an annual basis. That really reflects costs. I mean, you know, we have labor costs. I mean, the costs next year will be 4% or 5% for our main contract. So that right there introduces a cost that's going to go up no matter what. It's a negotiated contract that's going to go up. Utility costs, and just the costs in general. I mean, if you look at inflation, the Higher Education Price Index, things go up every year. So there has to be a way to cover that. And if state increases can't cover it, we have to find a way to do that. So in terms of how much it would actually go up, I think, you know, there are market forces that exist that control things, and there's a sense of fairness that we would have as well. When we calculated what FIA would mean to Stony Brook, we calculated about an average of about 6 to 7% increase is what we came up with. And that was based on a combination of about 6 to 7% for in-state and as high as 9 to 10% for out-of-state. And those were the numbers we used to calculate that. So that, I think, probably gives you a ballpark idea of what we were thinking about in terms of the increases. So as you see, that's not really very different from the historical increase that we've had before. But the key difference, and there's two key differences. One is that all of that money would go to our campus. Okay, that's difference number one. So instead of the money from these tuition increases going to the state funds, okay, to help balance the budget or whatever else they want to do with it, all of that money would come to the campus. And the second thing, as you said in response to the question, in the original question, is that we would set aside a percentage of that money to hold harmless our most economically disadvantaged students. So our Pell-eligible students, we would essentially make up the gap between TAP and the increase in tuition. And we estimate that would probably be about as much as 25% of the money that came in from this increased tuition would go to these kinds of scholarships. So we're absolutely committed that FIA is not going to change the makeup of Stony Brook. We're really committed to keeping, we're very proud of the fact that 32% of our students come from Pell-eligible families. We're not interested in changing that. And these type of scholarships, whether you call it SUNY Aid or whatever you decide to call it, would go to support that. So that's really, that's kind of the issue as far as I'm concerned in a nutshell. Yes?
Mike Adini, Stony Brook Independent. I'm interested to hear your opinion on the protesters. The protests last Wednesday, the kids out here making noise. What do you, what's your view of that from the position of president? Just your personal opinion, are they just making noise, or is there a more effective way for them to get their message across?
Well, that's a great question. I take it very seriously, obviously. I think whenever the students are speaking, I'm listening and I hear what they have to say. And, I'm very sensitive. Nobody likes the idea of seeing tuition go up, and I understand the sensitivity. I do think, as you heard from my answer before, that if we're going to maintain quality at Stony Brook, and I very much care about that. I care about, selfishly, I care about the quality of the Stony Brook degree. I really care, and that to me is important to the students. I think when you graduate, what's the difference between having a degree from Stony Brook and having a degree from another school? The fact is, if Stony Brook maintains its quality, then a degree from Stony Brook is worth more than a degree from another school. It's amazing. If you talk to people who hire, one of the first things they look at is, where did you go to school? They want to know, where do you go to school? It's what I do. People hand me a resume, I look and say, okay, where did they get their education? Okay? It's important because we do associate the quality of the education with the quality of people who come out. So it's absolutely imperative to me that we maintain quality for the education. And to do that, I think we are going to have to see, as I said before, this kind of rational tuition policy that keeps money there. So when the students say, the criticisms I've heard are twofold, and I'll just try and address them directly. One is that we really should be concentrating on getting restoration of funds from the state. So the goal here should really be to get restoration of funds from the state. No one would debate that we would love to see restoration of funds from the state. The notion that I don't care about the budget cuts is ridiculous. Of course I care about the budget cuts. I see the effects every day of what's happening with budget cuts. I have talked to all of our legislators. I have told them the devastating impacts that these kind of cuts have. I've asked them to restore these cuts many times, okay? I haven't been successful in doing that, nor have anybody else in the past couple years who've pushed forward. I know Chancellor Zimfer has pushed very hard. I've met with the Lieutenant Governor on this issue before. But what I've heard from them, and it's been unequivocal, and I was in Albany last Tuesday, and again I spoke with a number of the leaders of both the Assembly and the Senate. And there was one message I heard again. They said there is no money to restore right now. The state is looking at a $9.5 billion shortfall in tax revenue, and there's no money to restore. So the idea that I'm going to be able to go out and push and restore funds for us, I think is really not reasonable at this point in time. I would love it to be the case. I would love to be able to tell you that I think there's a good possibility that we'll see some restoration, but I don't see that as a reasonable possibility. So then the challenge becomes, in the face of the increased employment costs, which I told you before, which we have, again, it's going to be 4 or 5% this next year in terms of wage costs, how do we maintain quality? How do we keep things going without another form of revenue? So we'll be looking to philanthropy, we're looking for other sources, but fundamentally, I think, again, we have to look to other ways to try and increase revenue. That's why FIA, I think, is important. So I would say to the students, I'm absolutely with you in trying to get more money from the state. But I'm also realistic in terms of what I see is out there. And when I see this huge deficit that the state has, I think it's very unlikely we're going to get more money from that source. I just don't think it's going to happen. And so therefore we need flexibility to find other ways to keep quality high. So that would be the main message that I would say back. Now in terms of where to take that protest, I'm happy to hear it, and I'm happy to listen, and I absolutely respect everybody's right to do it. But if you talk about where priorities are in the state, I would say that higher education has not been a high priority for the state in terms of where I think it should be. People might argue with me, but I think it hasn't been the highest priority. K through 12, for example, I would say if you look at the state budget, it's traditionally been a higher priority than higher education. So how do we change that? Well, that has to do with the legislators again.